of the URC, and an analysis of an eventful few days of rugby all around the world, and much, much more. Thank you for the amazing couple of weeks that we've had in terms of numbers for the pod. We've absolutely shattered our own record for downloads in the last couple of weeks, and we're getting more YouTube views than ever. So thank you so much to everybody who's helped us out with that. For those who don't know, we also post a short form video on YouTube every single Saturday, whether it be player bios or the origin stories of the world's biggest clubs. We love to tell the rugby stories around the world that you won't hear anywhere else. So no Ender this evening, as you may have deduced. Unfortunately, he's not available, so all the best to him. We'll see him next week. But we do have an able-bodied guest with us, making his debut appearance on a podcast. Enjoys watching his beloved Scotland and Edinburgh when he's not busy protecting society as a policeman. Welcome to the show, Ben Stephenson. Ben, how are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks. You? How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So tell us a bit about yourself, Ben. We obviously know you're an Edinburgh Scotland fan. So what's your rugby journey been like?
Yeah, so to start, I think my first memory would be the 95 Rugby World Cup in South Africa. So you can probably deduce that I'm a little bit older. From that first memory, Rob Andrew kicking drop goal against Australia, and then going on to the 97 Lions tour. I remember Jeremy Goscott again kicking a drop goal against South Africa in the last minute to win that. But I think my best childhood memory was being sat with my dad watching Wales beat England at Wembley so that Scotland could win the last ever Five Nations in 1999, which of course is the last ever honour that Scotland have won, and been largely in the doldrums since then, but obviously on a ever increasing trajectory since then with the wealth of talent we now have. So yeah, that's my rugby journey so far. I did play for a little while, now looking to go into refereeing in due course now that I've sort of hung the rugby boots up and the gum shields put away safely.
Well, so on that, so obviously being a policeman, do you think being a policeman changes how you watch rugby? Obviously, it's a very law-heavy game. When you're watching it, are you thinking with your policeman's head on?
Possibly, yeah. I think there's a sort of slight intuition to understand the technicalities and the laws are maybe a little bit more closely than perhaps I would if I wasn't a police officer. So yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think I sometimes pick up on penalties before they're given. My partner will sometimes tell me off for shouting out at the TV before the ref's blowing the whistle. So yeah, that's what tends to happen. But I think it kind of encourages me to go into the refereeing sphere when the time's right.
Yeah, I think we all do that with calling penalties early. So we were chatting before we came on air. We were naming a few referees who are policemen in rugby and other sports, like someone like Nigel Whitehouse, Ben Whitehouse's dad. You were saying about Howard Webb, the football referee. Do you think all the best refs are policemen potentially?
There's probably an argument for that. I think they probably have the communication skills, the calmness, the objectivity, the reassuredness to settle things down when perhaps they're starting to boil over. I think you can see that when Howard Webb is a referee, very well respected. I think that's probably true of the rugby world when you see referees sort of give a little bit of time to the players to have their say, their bit of chit chat, and then step in when the time's right and calm things down. So yeah, I think there's some transferable skills there that would bode me well when I go down that route later in the future. Yeah.
Well, fingers crossed. We'll keep an eye on your career. Look forward to you refereeing the Premiership final or something in due course. So straight into rugby moment of the week. My rugby moment of the week is simple. It's my new Scarlet's top that I got. So I haven't, as other people may have heard me say already, I've discovered Vinted, and on there's loads of cheap rugby tops. There's loads, like so many, it's unbelievable, and they're like 3, 4, 5 quid, some of them. So it's dangerous if you've got the spare money. It's unbelievable. So and it also gives me a chance to plug our Sunday read, which was we've just reposted our 2-part series looking at rugby kit deals, how they are put together by clubs and suppliers, and how they affect the fans. And there will be a part 3, an as yet unwritten part 3 to that this weekend, that looks at it from a point of view that I had not looked at it before and I should have done. So everybody keep your eyes peeled for that. You can find our Substack in the Linktree link in the description box below. What was your rugby moment of the week, mate?
I think I'm going to pick on the comedy moment of the weekend, which is Cami Lopez's attempt at a tackle.
Yeah.
I think every man, woman and his dog have seen that, but I mean, there's a slightly serious point to it. Bayonne were up at that point, and then Leonie Nakarawa just, strolled in after Camille Lopez's shocking attempt at a tackle. I mean, if you're going to dive like a salmon, I think it's maybe time to think about hanging up the boots. It was a bit of a shocker. So that's my funny moment of the week. I think the serious point I make is probably Holly Davidson's, refereeing of Munster Ospreys. I think, it's great for women to see that going on in the men's game as, a woman refereeing to a very high standard. She communicates really well, manages the scrum. I think, there's a lot of positivity about that, and it's really, really good to see her take charge of a knockout game. And I think it is the first time in the URC knockout match that a female referee has officiated. So that was fantastic, and I think that's something to really encourage us going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Just going back to the Lopez one, I think I saw EK analysis, but Lopez made a business decision.
I saw that too. Yeah.
He's seen Nakarawa run down the wing, and he thought, "Shall I tackle that?" Nah. Who did Nakarawa play for again? Was it Glasgow or Edinburgh?
He played for Glasgow. Yeah. It was a bit of a checkered kind of time at Glasgow. I think there was some, real glimpses of skill, but just not the application and the attitude, I think. And I think that was possibly the primary reason behind him leaving, I think, a couple of years ago, was his lack of consistency. I think is probably the diplomatic way to put it. And
they had a Fijian winger as well. He now coaches for Pontypridd in the Welsh Prem, I think, or someone like that. I can't remember. He might actually have dropped down now because he's an assistant coach there, but now he's gone to a feeder club. But
was it Rugby? Might have been.
Sorry, who?
Was it Rugby? I can't remember.
No, I want to say it was Matualu, but I might have got that wrong.
Yeah, Nico Matualu. That sounds about right, actually. Yeah.
I just remember him with his hair up in the parades and things. He's definitely told the Scarlets about a few times. So, listeners, moment of the week. Scrumming Fly Half says Vaughan getting promoted and seeing all their celebrations for them winning the Pro Day, beating Grenoble in the final. More on that later. Fantastic moment of the week. We're delighted about that on this podcast, I can tell you. So we've got Sam Prendergast's chip and volley against Ulster. More on that game later. Leslie also says Holly Davidson. Leslie, we know, is a big Holly fan, as are we. David from Scrum of the Earth says Cecilia Tuipulotu's try against Exeter. More on that later. I knew that Gloucester Harbury were good, but I didn't realise how good they were until I actually sat down and watched them properly for the first time this weekend. Scary good. Rugby Julia says another PWR moment of Bristol beating Saracens away. I think it was the first ever away victory in a PWR semi-final. Correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, if I haven't got that right, but I watched the game. They were down at half-time and they managed to come back and win it. Absolutely fantastic. And Johan says, Bernard Jackman saying the Bulls aren't up to much, and if Leinster fail to win it, it's a massive failure. God bless you, Bernard. You've made that one spicy for us this week. Okay, let's jump into the URC action. So, Ben, you are a Edinburgh fan, and we just had the quarterfinal weekend, and a notable absentee, despite being in the playoff positions all season, was Edinburgh. Just give us your thoughts on your team this season. Even for myself, as someone who is very neutral towards Edinburgh, frustrating team.
Incredibly frustrating. I think getting Ben Healy in from Munster was a massive stroke from the SRU, obviously, to get him into the Scottish national team. Qualified through maternal side of the family. To have him at Edinburgh was a great thing. I think what let us down was the lack of bonus point wins. We didn't get enough bonus points at all. I think most of our wins were 4-pointers, not 5-pointers. To win more games than the Ospreys, and I think Benetton possibly, I think it just demonstrated that lack of attacking.
11 games. And I think I didn't get into the playoffs.
Yeah, 11. I know. And then ended up with 50 points. But our points difference was low double figures. I think it was plus 19 off the top of my head. So I think all in all, I think Ben Healy played every single game, nearly every single minute of the season, including the I think he might have missed one of the cup games, I think, off the top of my head. And I think he just had his back line that let him down. I think injuries, Befeli being out most of the season, who's world-class Argentinian back. Darcy Graham been out injured again. He seems to be getting niggly injuries every season at the moment. a sort of misfiring centre partnership, whether it was James Lang and Mark Bennett, or whether it was with Christine in there, or whether it was with Matt Curry, who's young and up and coming, but still just didn't offer that crash ball 12 and 13 that I think would have benefited us. We just weren't breaking lines really through the sort of midfield area, and I think Ben Healy was just relying on, it seemed the last couple of years, he's just relying on high box kicks. Then Jamie Ritchie of all people would run through and try and knock back towards the rest of his force to try and create an attacking position. It was a slightly odd tactic when I first saw it, but it seemed to work to a point. But I think there wasn't enough diversity in the sort of last 6 to 8 weeks to really drive us into the playoffs, and to only get 1 bonus point win, and that was against the Scarlets at home. I think that said it all. Going to South Africa, not really putting up a fight in either game, losing at home to Munster, and then kind of concluded with a pretty abject, if not the worst, performance of the season away to Benetton, where first game of the season we didn't score a single try. The attacking game wasn't there. Defensively, we were all over the place. Wingers weren't involved in the game, and I think overall it just epitomised that misfiring season, that we won games, we didn't will them well enough, and just really disappointing conclusion to the season. Last point I'll probably make about it is just the difference that you see between Duhan van der Merwe when he plays for Scotland and the Duhan van der Merwe that plays for Edinburgh. There just seems to be a significant divergence in performance, whether he's playing for the national team or whether he's playing for Edinburgh. And I can give you an example. I went to the Cardiff game away when we won 24-7, but it wasn't a bonus point win again. One of those games where all 3 tries were scored off the base of a rolling maul. And Duhan van der Merwe got sin bin for something pretty silly and cynical, and his attitude walking off was pretty disappointing. Didn't seem to care, kind of trying to G up the Cardiff fans. That I was the only Edinburgh fan in that part of the crowd, so obviously I'm standing there with him surrounding me, sort of giving it a bit back, and language I can't really repeat it on a podcast, but I think it just kind of epitomised his sort of lack of professionalism towards the end of the season. He's a world-class player on his day, and he's one of our only Lions players. It's, at Edinburgh, along with Hamish Watson. And it was just disappointing to sort of see him not really perform to his optimal over the last 6 to 8 weeks, because that's the one that Edinburgh should be able to rely on, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he got that try in the 1872 Cup, and I think that speaks to kind of what you were talking about, of that needing the big occasion to get up for it, that he needed to have that big moment to get that moment for him to come through for the team. And I think that's definitely the takeaway that I've had watching Edinburgh, because you read the team sheet and you think, wow, these will be good, and then you watch them and you think, what's going on? But you're still winning games. But I don't know, are you looking for a change in coaching, or what needs to change to fix you for next season?
I think it's having a clean bill of health, first of all. I think Sean Everett's been given an extra 2 years already, I think, halfway through this season. So it's actually speaking to another Edinburgh fan who's as keen as I am on it, and he does some work for BBC Sport and publishes some work on there. And he came to a similar conclusion as I did, is that he's not too keen on Everett as a coach. I think it's maybe a little bit too one-dimensional, but I think, again, a backline that needs to work. I mean, Magnus Bradbury's coming back as a direct spot for Bill Matter, which should be interesting. I think Bristol didn't really work out very much, like Adam Hastings at Gloucester. He's going back up to Glasgow, so you're seeing 2 prominent Scottish players coming back into the URC after leaving the Premiership, after inconsistent returns, whether it's been injury or whether it's just been form. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But I think it's restructuring the back line. There just wasn't enough there, and I think the back line attacking play needs to be the key focus over the summer before her first game of the season, which is at home to Leinster on the Friday night. So couldn't be any tougher than that, I don't think.
Leinster lost their first game this season, so it could happen again away at Glasgow, I think it was.
Good. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about,
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, let's talk about Leinster now then. So they beat Ulster in their quarter-final. Ulster put up a bit of a fight, I guess you could say. I mean, Ulster had a bit of a resurgence, you'd say, this season towards the end. They definitely got a lot better under Ritchie, and they just seemed to lack the quality really to get over Leinster. Leinster kind of just needed their big players just to turn up, have a few moments, and that kind of got them over the line. I thought Billy Burns didn't have a brilliant game, I've got to be honest. He's kicking from hand. His decision making was okay. It's just his execution let him down for me, in my opinion. And then you saw Sam Prendergast come off the bench for Leinster and light it up with his chip and things. What do you make of Leinster at the moment? Do you think they're there's been some murmurs that this is a Leinster team that's not, despite making the Champions Cup final, they're not at the moment being vintage Leinster.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think, they've possibly got two of the best forwards in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment, Van der Fleer and Joe McCarthy, who was absolutely incredible on Saturday. Someone he's kind of gone through that pathway, Blackrock College into Trinity at Dublin, that well-trodden path that a lot of Leinster, players and Irish internationals have been through. And I think, someone at his age, I think he's already a shoo-in for the Lions tour next year. He just looks absolutely brilliant. And having Josh Van der Fleer behind him, that they're two of the really, really strong players that Leinster have that they can rely on. But I think, and this is going to sound a little bit controversial, I think Leinster lack a quality 10 at the moment. I just don't think Sexton, he's insurmountable in terms of his quality, his leadership, his communication, his effectiveness, game management and so on and so forth. But I feel like Leinster maybe haven't got that right just yet. And I do think that they might lose in Pretoria on the high veld this weekend. There's a lot of differentials that go into playing in Pretoria. The weather's going to be different. It could be pouring down with rain. It's going to be cold. It's going to be windy. The altitude is going to be an impact, and I'm just not sure. I think they're going to lose in Pretoria, and I think they might lose by a little bit.
You say cold, like we've had one of our followers, Johan, commenting on our stuff saying it's gone cold here. It's dipped below 20 degrees, and I'm like, mate, no sympathy coming from the UK here. It's not. It's threatening to go over 20 degrees on some days, but doesn't. So on that then, this is unusual for Leinster having to go away in a semi-final, not something that they normally have to do, and they're having to go down to South Africa, play at altitude, and then if they win, come back and play a game against. If it's against Glasgow, that will be at home, but or Munster away. So you're saying you think that they could have a tough time down there?
Yeah, I think so.
Even with like the Bulls have now, we'll come on to the Bulls in a second, but they've now lost Ardenser and Moody. They're two wingers who have both scored 10 tries each this season.
Okay, that might change things then. I just thinking about the environment and going away. I think it's a long way to try. I mean, you've seen the returns for most Northern Hemisphere. Obviously, the 12 of the 16 teams go down there, and I think over the 3 seasons, I still feel like the wins that teams have had down is probably high single figures, low double figures potentially. A lot of teams come back there with no points. Yep. And I know Edinburgh did have a win a couple of years ago against the Lions off the top of my head in Joburg, but I think apart from that, I don't really remember many teams going down there and picking up a result. I just think with the semi-final, those players injured aside, I still think the Bulls might have a bit too much, and I think it might come down to the lack of a class 10 for Leinster at the moment. I'm not a massive fan of Rossburn, and I'm not too keen on Crawley in behind him either. I think there's just a lack of class there. And I did read a review before I kind of reached his opinion, and they said the same. They just thought you kind of Burn kind of control things to a point, which didn't show that sort of bit of flair that I think was necessary to really drive Leinster forward from the back.
I think that's a fair comment, and I think that is something that Leinster are missing, is someone to go off script. Now they've got Lama, who is an X Factor player, but the fact that he's not getting picked for Ireland, you could say, tells you about maybe where his ceiling is. O'Brien as well has been fantastic for them this season, but I think they're so system led. And look, it's clearly incredibly successful for them, and you can't doubt the CVs of the coaches and things. But I just feel they need someone in that back line, like a Cheslin Colby or someone to just break the script and just do something unexpected. Because I feel like you can prepare for Leinster. You know what's coming with Leinster. Whereas if you look at like Toulouse, which is like the other obviously biggest team in Europe, you can't necessarily figure out Toulouse in the same way because they've got that star quality. Now Leinster have obviously got star quality. This isn't me saying that Leinster have got bad players. I'm just saying that they're very stick to the scripty, and I think they need someone to just flick the switch and go, no, we're going to do something other here.
Is Geordie Barrett the answer when he comes over?
See, I don't know if I'd call Geordie Barrett that kind of player. I just don't know. Obviously, he's world class, it depends where they play him. We've talked about this on the pod previously about what his best position might be. I think I think the coaches need to be willing to just give up control for just one player. Like when Wales were class, we had it where we were structured. Apart from Shane Williams, you could do whatever he wants because he was a genius. And I just feel like Leinster need that. As always, people can let me know if am I right, am I wrong in the comments down below, or tweet us at Pirate Rugby Podcast to let us know your thoughts. But for me, I would be looking for that player if I'm Leinster now to just, and you could say, look, Dan Sheehan's incredible, okay, but it's that kind of player isn't going to be a forward, probably not. And I've had people saying to me that you're seeing the value when it comes to the international stage with Ireland, that the Munster players of Crowley, Tyburn are bringing in being able to be that. Again, they're not exactly like, we're not introducing like Simon Zebo's not playing for Ireland currently. It's not that kind of player, but it's just that one to just take them to that extra level. Tyburn is an absolute cheat mode player. I've said that in the past. So just going back to the Bulls then. So the Bulls are a bit down in the dumps at the moment because they beat Benetton, but not in the emphatic way that they were expecting. They came out of the traps at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but Benetton managed to drag them into a bit of an arm wrestle that they weren't expecting. I think, do we have to give credit to Benetton? I mean, they lost, but they did themselves proud down there.
Yeah, I agree with it. They lost by 7, but they had greater possession, greater territory, and I think they can. I think of the potential teams that could win away. I think they definitely came the closest, and I think a brilliant season for them. Second or third season where they've been in the top 8. Obviously won the Rainbow Cup with a truncated kind of COVID URC season. I just think they're going from strength to strength. I think that the form that some of their players had in the Six Nations, whether it be Negri or Menoncello, kind of just carried over into the rest of their season. And they've lost some big players as well. Garbisi, Caparozzi, they've all gone to the top 14, but they just seem to have this talent pool coming through. Whether it's the expense of Zebri, who again, kind of propped up the table, got a win and a draw and a couple of bonus points. So, they're on an improvement trajectory. But Benetton, I think, are one of those teams that are really kind of good to watch, deserve all the plaudits they get, and have a really strong team. When Vecatero going over there, Jacob Umanga going there after Wasps, fell into administration. They picked up some really good players there that have their obviously their strong Italian core, but they've got those sort of European players that are really, really strong in the backs. And I think, yeah, like you say, very unlucky to not come away with the win. But I'm still stick to my guns. I think Leinster are going to lose in Pretoria. That's my view at the moment. For now, once the team lineups are released, I might change my mind. But for now, I think they're going to lose.
Well, we'll see. We're not talking about it in this pod, but the South Africa squad has been announced. We'll cover it another time, I guess. But obviously, no Bulls players in it, apart from one who's been called up, which has confused a few people. But yeah, I do think that losing Aronson and Moody is a huge blow for them, I have to say. But they've got 10 tries each. David Creel, their 13, has got 13 tries and 10 try assists this season, by far the most try involvement of any player in the URC. And their scrum half, Papieren, has got the most try assists of anybody as well. So they're blowing people out of the water try-wise. I think they had a bit of I feel like the Bulls, what they're suffering with is they're suffering from a bit of they expect to win, and they expect to win by a lot at home. So when they don't win right, it kind of affects them a bit. And they had that tough loss away at Leinster earlier in the season, and they lost at home to Munster. And I just feel like they're in their own heads a bit, the Bulls. I don't know whether you agree with that.
Yeah, I think that shows that there's a bit of inconsistency there, isn't there, perhaps? I guess that's kind of the byproduct of the South African teams joining is the travelling involved, is that it's difficult for us going down there, but it's very difficult for them coming up here, so to speak. And obviously, I think there's been quite a few occasions where, all 4 of those teams, Bulls included, that they'll send up slightly weakened teams because, depending on where the fixture lies in the calendar, whether it's around cup games or closer to that Christmas period when there's a lot of games like back to back and stuff like that. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah. Let's go now to Glasgow v Stormers. So first question I've got for you, mate, is I generally get the sense that Edinburgh and Glasgow fans cheer for the other team when their team isn't playing. It doesn't seem to be a very bitter rivalry.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Like, as an Edinburgh fan, if Glasgow are playing us, I want us to win. As soon as Glasgow are playing any other team, yeah, I think you're right. I think if there is a rivalry, it's slightly conditional. I think it's not an obvious rivalry. I don't think. I think because of the way the teams are structured, you see players bounce between the teams. Rory Sutherland's gone between the teams. Mark Bennett, Ali Price, the most recent example. Ross Thompson's leaving Glasgow to come to Edinburgh. I just think with the way the teams are managed, and I think there's not that mutual dislike. And because there are only two teams and they're regularly together at training camps, they'll be there the summer when they go across to North America and South America. That sort of very interesting tour that they've got planned. A lot of travelling involved. I'm not sure many Scotland fans will be able to budget for all four of those games. There's a lot of travelling. Same with the November internationals, and then again with the Six Nations. I think they kind of don't really want there to be too much of a rivalry because it affects the cohesion of the Scotland team, which is obviously more important than the sum of Glasgow and Edinburgh doing well in the domestic competition. So yeah, you're spot on with that. I think that's how I certainly feel. Is that I wanted Glasgow to beat the Stormers. I wasn't waving my South African flag and wearing a Springboks jersey. That certainly wasn't in my mindset.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting because obviously conversations about the number of regions and things, but now I'm thinking about Zebra Benetton, and I don't get the sense that that's a particularly heated rivalry either. Now Zebra are different because Zebra's history is that they were like a Italian barbarian style team, and then they got located at one place to become a URC team. Maybe if there was another team in the north of Italy, close to Benetton, which is the rugby hotbed in Italy, maybe that would be more bitter. I don't know, but yeah, definitely, it's not necessarily the case between the likes of Osprey Scarlets or Munster Leinster or something like that. So it's interesting to know.
Well, I think Glasgow's biggest rivalry is probably with Munster, to be honest. I think there's so much history between those two teams, and
we will come on to that.
But
no firstly, speaking about this game, Stormers Glasgow, I'm going to come at this from a Stormers point of view, but I'm going to do that after you've come at it from a Glasgow point of view.
No problem. The weather was appalling, and Glasgow prepared for the weather. The Stormers did not prepare for the weather, and I think that's just completely epitomised by Mandy Libbock's awful kicking. I think he even might have been involved in quite a few knock-ons.
Lying on the ground with the hand on the ball, and Mandy Libbock is kicking. I'm like, oh no, it's going to happen again.
No, and it happened 4 times out of 4. I went back and looked at the highlights today because I wanted to get a really good understanding of where he was kicking from, and all 4. One was straight forward, which was the last one, which hit the post, and the other 3, you'd expect they were kickable. They weren't straightforward. They're probably in the 60 to 70% bracket, but you'd expect 1 or 2 of them to go over. And I think, bearing in mind the score was only 2010, I think it was, before this bizarre try at the end, which we can go into a bit more detail about. You think if Libbock makes 2 or 3 of those kicks, the game takes on a completely different complexion. And I think he was responsible for a knock-on that Glasgow scored a try from early in the first half, or maybe at the start of the second half. So they just didn't have a clue how to play in the Scotstoun weather, and it is appalling there at times. It's the west, it's west of Scotland. The stadium's kind of exposed. It's, you've got the railway line running behind. There's all sorts of the elements that kind of get mixed there, and as soon as it's raining, it becomes a really, really difficult place to play. And again, Glasgow, a bit like Leinster, just very, very rarely lose at home. It just doesn't happen. I think even maybe didn't lose a home game this season off the top of my head. They might have lost 1.
I don't think they did.
Yeah, so I think it just goes to show that the advantage of home territory. But Manny Libbock kind of epitomised the Stormers' just ill preparedness for that game, and yeah, that's the reason why I think they lost. But the try at the end, I don't know what was going on. I don't know what the Stormers were playing at. It's a bit of a botched line out. It goes to possibly the replacement centre. He tries to kick it. It hits a Glasgow player, comes off Ross Thompson, goes behind him, so he's not a knock on. And this dabs the try down. I just thought that's just the most. It was odd. It was very, very odd to watch, and I was laughing at the TV. It was one of those where really couldn't understand. I don't think I've ever seen a try quite like that.
It was proper.
It was bizarre.
It was no, they lost. They just had to do something and then get it through. General thoughts on Glasgow, because they are just as a team, because their stats are really weird if you look at them as a team, because They kick the least of anyone in the league. And conventional rugby wisdom is that winning teams kick. They don't kick at all, but they win a lot. And so, but they're not like a crazy offloading jouet team either, or at least not on the level of someone like a Harlequins or someone like that. How would you describe them as a team and their approach?
The pack is unbelievably adept at scoring tries. Johnny Matthews in particular, I think, this season 5 tries in one game, I think, in a cup game. Maybe it's last season, I can't remember, but they just seem to have this really, really well functioning pack, whether it's coming more off a line out in the scrum. They don't really have a 10. It's weird, like, because Duncan Weir's been there, but doesn't really play much. Tom Jordan was 10, then went to 12. And at the weekend, George Horn was kicking at 9. So it's one of those, like, almost a bit like
goal kicking isn't
top cutters. Yeah, and you know, like the 9's kick in France, you don't really see it in sort of like the UK and Ireland, and it was interesting to see George Horn and the opposite of Manny Leboeuf kick 5 from 5. So obviously understands the Scotstoun conditions as well as anybody. But yeah, it's an interesting one to try and explain. But I think it does come down to that very, very strong pack and coming off the base of it and rolling over. I think that's kind of been their modus operandi to score a lot of points. And again, just a wealth of bonus point wins based on that approach, I think. But yeah, not a huge amount of flair across the back. I think Cancellieri probably quite, you know, known for his flair. But I think apart from that, it just seems people like Stafford McDowell and, you know, people that just like go into contact a lot, I think, and not really playing that kicking out wide game. Sorry?
They got that weird move where they throw the 13 up in the line out.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? I think it's just trying to cause problems to the opposition that don't really understand what's going on. Just the equivalent of baseball in cricket, I suppose. You know, just go all out and leave it out in the field, and no one knows what's going on. A bit of messiness going on there. Yeah.
Going back to Leboeuf's kicking. So Leboeuf has actually got one of the better out of the South African 10s. His goal kicking percentage is actually pretty good, and he has a better goal kicking percentage than Sia Masuku in the URC, which not many people would realize. But he just has these days. He has days where he can't miss, and he has these days where he just couldn't hit a barn door, and it's frustrating. And because it's a narrative with him as well, it just comes up, and every time he misses a kick, it's like an extra thing. There's people looking at each other like, oh no, it's happening again. They had Sasha Feinberg and Gomezulu on the pitch, and he, in terms of his expected kicks compared to what he gets, actually overperforms. If opt to do this thing with the percentage of likelihood of the kick to go over, and they've said that Sasha overperforms the most of anyone in the URC for how good his kicks are. But with Manny in the team, Manny was the kicker and Sasha wasn't. Now, why they didn't change that over earlier, I'm not sure. Why Dobson, the Stormers coach, didn't have the conviction, or with the kicking coach, to say, Sasha, your goal kicking performance has been better this season. You're kicking ahead of Manny, and then Manny doesn't even have to worry about it. I just don't know what's gone on there. Apparently, Sasha did get cramps in the second half, and that's why he didn't take some of the later kicks. But again, just why not? Why not change it over sooner? So, but that pales into significance with my other frustrations with the Stormers. So the Stormers all season, and I've been consistent on this, have been just go out there, lads, and the class players will figure something out. So someone like Manny Leboeuf or Sasha or Warwick Gallant or Damien Willemse when he was fit, or someone else, Davide Diamani, will do something amazing, and then we'll just win. And they keep getting found out. They got found out at home against the Ospreys, and they'll get found out in other games again in the future unless they put more structure into their game. Again, going back to the Springbok squad that's been announced, Stormers have had 9 call-ups. 7 of them are forwards, not backs, forwards. And 4 of 3 of the 4 uncapped forwards in the Springbok squad are Stormers. So obviously their forwards are really good, and they've got the most scrum penalties won of any team in the URC this season. But they just refuse to play any kind of a structured game or a forward-oriented game. I get it. I get that the Cape Town team is supposed to have a bit of swagger about it, and they're supposed to put it about, and they're supposed to be the flash team. Well, guess what? The Bulls up north, your favourite people, the Bulls up north, have broken the records for number of tries, number of points scored in a URC season. Whereas Stormers are out here just looking like a shambles on the pitch sometimes, to be honest. They need to get some structure into their game. They need to start tightening up when they need to and using that incredible forward pack they've got to make it work, and then just trusting the backs to execute when the time is on. And for me, that is on John Dobson and his coaches of not putting that clear game plan in place to actually make something happen. Like, the number of line breaks they get is huge compared to the number of carries that they get. But it's like every carry has to be a line break, is how they play. And it just, like I said, it leaves them exposed badly. So that's my Stormers rant. They've got to be better next season. I think there's a case of well, we won the league in the first season and we came second in the second season, so we'll probably get to the final again this season with the Stormers. Well, turns out not, guys. So just so frustrating. Such a frustrating team. Phew, that was my rant. Okay, last quarter final to talk about then was Munster Ospreys. We mentioned Holly's performance before. I have to say, a few Ospreys fans on Twitter getting a bit irate about Holly. Guys, Holly didn't cost you that game. It was 38% possessions, 30% territory in the second half for the Ospreys. There you go. I said that this game was like someone watching someone crack a walnut in a vice. Munster, just ground them down, and they didn't pile on the points, but knock out Rugby.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't vintage from Munster by any means, I don't think. Crowley at 10, again, a very, very good performance. I think I think the number 10 jersey's got to be his over the summer. The winter, the winter tests over our summer, the Southern Hemisphere winter. I think it wasn't a fantastic performance by Munster, but again, like you say, just probably did do enough. It was I wouldn't say it was turgid, but it wasn't the most exciting game of rugby to watch. I think Munster just needed to put in what they do, play to their required standards, kept it tight, retain their structure. I think they're always going to be an Ospreys side. I mean, to be fair to Ospreys, I say this slight sort of tint in my heart after they kind of defied all the odds to get that last position in the 8, at our expense. But they did come in with some great form. That win against Cardiff that last weekend of the regular season was a fantastic performance, and I mean nobody expected them to get that 8 spot. So I think to their credit, they got probably the best outcome for their season, which was a quarter final and not a heavy loss, a loss, but a loss that was probably to be expected. But at least they got an extra game of the season that Edinburgh fans didn't get. So I'd still be quite pleased with that from an Ospreys perspective. But like you say, Holly Davidson, as a referee, I think she's young, she's keen, her communication's brilliant, her management of the scrum, the ruck. The infringements, the penalties count. She just seems to get it right, and I'm just really, really impressed with her. And again, this is a slight Scottish bias. It's just really nice to see a female referee in a men's knockout game. But she's not getting roundly criticised or any sort of vitriol towards her based on her sex. So I think that's something to be really proud of as a Scotland fan and Edinburgh fan, and just seeing that level of officiating from women in the men's game, and it's just something to be encouraged going forward. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, definitely agree with all of that. So we kind of alluded to it earlier. Munster now go on to host Glasgow in the semi-final, which is one of those, they hate each other, but people on the outside might not know why. What's your take on the weird Munster Glasgow rivalry?
I think Ryan Wilson probably knows why. I think he's kind of been centre of that in the recent years, obviously with his roving reporting with what is now Premier Sports, and he was probably one of the main protagonists over recent years of sort of that attitude between them. I think maybe it's difficult to pinpoint. There just seems to be maybe it's just the community in Limerick and the community in Glasgow are very similar with their attitude towards rugby, and I think maybe that's where it derives from. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, obviously the stories are of Ryan Wilson going after Conor Murray's standing leg when he was kicking. There is some video evidence of that. So it's hard to deny, and I think Ryan Wilson has spoken about it as well on other podcasts. I don't know. It's not one that I'm that close to. I know that Munster fans are definitely up for it. because I've spoken to Munster fans when they've played Glasgow, and they're like, or even when Glasgow are playing someone else, they're like, I hope Glasgow lose. So there's definitely something to it there. Apparently, that Munster also didn't like something about Gregor Townsend when he was at Glasgow back in the early noughties as well. Something was up there. I don't know, but it's a very real rivalry. It's a very real they don't like each other type thing. So hopefully that translates into something spicy at the weekend.
I think it will. I've no doubt about that. I think there's sufficient personalities on both sides. Simon Zebo, if he starts, I think he's got it in him to sort of wind the Glasgow players up. And I think someone like Johnny Matthews, George Turner, on the Glasgow side of things, has probably got it in them as well. I think there's going to be some spice, and I think it'll be. I think of the two games this weekend, that's the one to watch. I think it could be close. I think Glasgow go there with a real chance of making the final, and the history behind it just adds that little bit extra to it. And I think I'm really looking forward to that one. It's definitely my game this weekend that I've down as number one to watch.
Yeah, Peter O'Mahony, people love getting involved with him as well. They almost see him as a bit of a, my job today is to wind up Peter O'Mahony, because it's just a thing that you do when you play against the team that he's playing in. So again, I just hope it does turn into something of a spicy game. The 15,000 tickets sold already, according to Twitter. So it's already got more than was there for the quarterfinal. And again, I just hope that they're fully up for it. And if they win and they go through, then they secure home advantage in the final as well, I believe. So a lot on the line. Well, there's obviously loads on the line because it's a semi-final. So last thing on the URC then. So 4 home wins. None of the games were particularly amazing. And we'll look at some other leagues later where there was no away wins either. We're now in June. If you include the World Cup warm-up games, it's hard to believe that the World Cup was this season. The World Cup warm-up games were in August. This season has been crazy long. Do you think we're starting to see players starting to feel the strain of this incredibly long season?
Unless you're Leinster, who've got 3 teams, then the answer is probably yes. I think Leinster really only have that squad depth to be able to compete, every week with, a third choice 10, a third choice fullback, a third choice prop, So, I mean, yeah, it's a long old season, isn't it? And I think with the pool stage, with the European competition, I know they break for a couple of weeks in between, but you're fitting in an awful lot of rugby. And I understand that what the URC have done with designing the season so that it doesn't clash with Six Nations games. And I get the reason behind that, because obviously they want to ensure that the players are back for the URC games. It's a tricky one because you've got 16 teams there, and it's the travelling involved as well. I understand they do the blocking with, you only go to South Africa once, you have 2 weeks down there, you come back, you acclimatise, and the jet lag's non-existent because obviously it's only an hour or 2 hour difference depending on the time of the season you go. But there's an awful lot of rugby being played, and I think World Cup added. Then you've got the summer tests coming up, which are starting first week of July. I think maybe even one team's got, well, Wales playing South Africa on the 22nd, aren't they? So that's not even on the same day as the URC final, which I find utterly bizarre because, well, it won't actually. But yeah, if there's a Stormers were in there, it would have been a problem. But obviously, the Bulls not having many players picked up at all by the Springboks, it might not be such an issue. But to have every weekend almost having some kind of rugby on, and I think the URC season starts 21st of September, so there's a very short break between the end of season internationals and the first weekend of the URC.
Yeah, I worked it out. Between Wales's last game and the first regional game, it's 52 days, or 50 to 53 days, which is actually longer than I thought it might be. The top 14 probably next season started last week somehow, or something like that. Top 14's like that.
It did, yeah. But their season doesn't finish for 3 weeks because they've got that strange, I think 1 and 2 jump, don't they, the first round, and everyone else plays off. So there's an extra there's another at least 3 weeks of the top 14, and I think it's interesting that they have a 26 game season. They both, they play home and away for 26 weeks. I think that's remarkable. They managed to fit that amount of rugby in, especially with the European calendar. So
it literally started in August and will finish end of June. So that's why the French players don't tour in the summer, because that's their rest, and then they go back into top 14. It's also a part of the reason we covered this a couple of weeks ago, why the top 14 is able to bring in so much income, is because there's so many games. It's much more like a football model. Obviously they don't have midweek games, because even that for the top 14 would be crazy, but it is literally a game every single weekend, and it is mad, and it has become a bit of a meme now. So it's interesting that that league gets so much love, and I love it as well. But there is this kind of it's a lot of games. It's a lot of games. But even with the URC now, because I know we spoke about Leinster's depth, but those players have played. It's just they played for Ireland instead of Leinster. So even then, I'm starting to wonder whether these players, especially they've got to go down to South Africa as well after this on tour, whether they're just we're gonna start seeing some flat games towards the end of the season because the players have just had it.
Yeah, and I think I saw another thing today that Emerging Ireland have got a 3-game tour of South Africa, and that's on the same weekend as a second or third game weekend of the URC, and it's just when you have that balance between revenue driving and giving players time off, and I worry that maybe the balance, the scales are tipped too far in the favour of revenue at the moment. It's a difficult one to think about, but I think there's a lot of rugby going on. You see, and rugby's changed. I think rugby's changed so much in the last 5 years. I think you look at just the development since pre-COVID to now. I think there's been a huge change in the style of it's played, the level of fitness, the type of surface they're playing on, the travelling involved. It's just become a real sort of stretch for them to play. And I think going from World Cup into a very competitive URC, top 14 even more competitive. I think only Oyonnax at the bottom were nowhere near everyone else, but there's a real sort of like home and away kind of mentality in the top 14, isn't there? A lot of teams win at home and they'll lose away, and no one really kind of breaks out from the top of that league. I don't think Toulouse were miles clear at the top, and La Rochelle dropped down, and then you've got Stade Francais of all teams kind of breaking through, who have kind of pretty quiet kind of 2 or 3 years. I think in the top 14, never really done too much. So it's interesting whether the model needs to be looked at, and whether there's an argument that the URC follows where you only play certain teams twice and the other teams once. I think that's probably a happy medium. But there are 16 teams in the URC, so there's 2 more than top 14. But to play home and away, I think is a big ask, especially with international rugby definitely being trumping the domestic competition.
And we've got Champions Cup in Europe as well. So Super Rugby is 14 regular season games. Like, the shortest Northern Hemisphere league is 18. Like, the Premiership still got 18. I still feel like, particularly in the UK, this is a very UK centric point of view, I still feel like rugby massively lives in the shadow of football in terms of people are football. So many rugby fans are football fans as well, and they have this expectation of there will be a game every week. And so in Wales, they've tried to bring in this new league. Well, they are bringing in this new league that only runs from September to December, which is much more like NPC in New Zealand, or like Currie Cup in South Africa. And people are like, well, that's not long enough. It should be longer than that. And it's like, around the world, leagues, rugby competitions are much shorter. Like Japan's competition, I think, lasts 5 and a bit months. I just think that people almost think that we should be playing midweek matches sometimes with rugby, and don't realize that we need to play fewer games probably. And I know that's tough from a club's point of view as well, because clubs need to make revenue. And at the same time, I do think that 11 guaranteed home games a season for clubs is not really enough, less than 1 a month. So it's a very, very difficult balance to find. But I think this, when you've got season starting in August, ending in June, that's too long.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I mean, it might not be the best comparison, but you look at the NFL, their season 4.5 months, including the Super Bowl. I think it's middle of September, ends in January. Obviously, that's intense impact sport, but rugby's not too dissimilar to that in terms of what you're expected to do, like the contact you go into. And I think with a lot of players struggling with concussion now, you see Steve Thompson being the best example of that. And there's going to be more players going down that route, unfortunately, just because of the athleticism of the players now, the contact they go into, the strength of the tackle, the way the ruck's managed. A lot more force going into there on the neck and the head region, and I do worry about the welfare of players, I think. And 18 URC games plus a minimum of 4 European games, plus then potentially knockout games, and then the international picture, which a lot of players across the URC do get picked up for international duty, don't they? Especially Glasgow and Edinburgh players. The vast majority of them will be away from their clubs for that 4-week period in the autumn, and then that 5 to 7 week period over 6 nations where they get released back to the club. So those 2 kind of like fallow weekends is obviously managed between the union and the clubs, but there's a lot there for a player to take on. And we've seen Short and Chris Stuart Hogg. I know he's come back, which is a bit of a surprise. And obviously Stuart Hogg has a bit of there's some stuff that Stuart Hogg needs to sort out without going into too much detail. It's obviously all in the press, so anyone wants to have a look at that. But he on the the Netflix series just said I'm broken, and he was only 31 at that point. You saw the degradation in his quality in the last Six Nations he played. He almost fell off a cliff in terms of how he was playing. You could tell he was exhausted, he was broken and knackered, and probably had fallen out of love with rugby, I think. So you don't want to see world-class players sort of leaving the scene like that. You want it to be, when they want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Right, and now we shall lead ourselves into rugby around the world. Starting off with Super Rugby. So we had, like we alluded to a second ago, all home wins in the quarterfinals, with the Blues, the Canes, the Brumbies and the Chiefs all progressing at the expense of the Rebels, the Drua, the Red and the Highlanders. We say au revoir to Melbourne Rebels, have now played their foreseeable last ever game. So that's terribly sad to see. Oh, I've got Kat joining me here. So have you caught much Super Rugby this season, mate? What have you made of it?
It's again, because it's such a short season, it kind of finishes as quickly as it starts, I think, doesn't it? And I think my kind of general kind of view is how poor the Crusaders have been this year. I was really surprised. Like, just not there at all. Lost their first 6 out of their 7 games, I think. Went to across to play the Drua and lost quite a few home games. Maybe picked up a few games at the end, but I think their side's been decimated. Monga's gone. A few other players have left the scene. Scott Barrett's not there anymore, I don't think, either. So that's kind of. I think Sam Whitelock gone. Yeah, obviously went to France, didn't he?
Yeah, scored.
Now he's retired in France.
Sam Whitelock scored a try with his last ever touch of a rugby ball for Poe, by the way, at the weekend.
That's amazing. He's someone I absolutely love watching. Someone like him, or Kieran Reid, or Richie McCaw. Those like real sort of stalwarts of the All Black jersey. And it's nice to see that he did that in his last ever game.
How many of the 2015 All Blacks are still playing? I'll have to look that up later, because it feels like the big ones have gone now. Anyway,
Beauden Barrett will be the key one I can think of. Obviously, he was a substitute in the final, wasn't he, when he scored that very, very cool try off. Yeah, Ben Smith broke line. And
Ben Smith, what a player. That team had Beauden Barrett and Sonny Bill Williams on the bench in the final. That's how good it was. They've still... Well, Marnonu, I think, is still playing in MLR, technically. And... Is
he nearly 40 now? He's getting on a bit, isn't he?
Probably. Matt Gitto, who also played in that final, is still playing in MLR. Julian Surveyor plays for Moana Pacifican now. He's still going.
Mike Cooper's still playing, but he's still at the Tars, isn't he, I think?
Quade Cooper?
Yep.
He plays in Japan now. So he's just been relegated from Japan League One to the second division in Japan. His team, Kintetsu Liners, got relegated. So, oh dear. Anyways, so back to Super Rugby. The big chat that's going on at the moment is about the 8 out of the 12 in Super Rugby get to the playoffs. There's too many in it.
Yeah, I think just go to top 4, or do the top quator system, top 6, 1 and 2 jump straight around, and 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5. I think that might be the better way to do it. But I mean, Melbourne Rebels were 8th, weren't they? I think, did they win 5 or 6 games and they're still qualifying for a quarter final? It just seems a little bit like what it feels like you're rewarding, not failure. And it's sad saying this about Melbourne, because there's not going to be a Melbourne team next year, which is terrible news, and it's really sad, because how is Super Rugby going to restructure for next season with 11 teams? It seems it's going to be a head scratcher for them to think about over the next 6-7 months. It'll be interesting to see what happens, whether the Melbourne Rebels can get something together. But it looks pretty much like a foregone conclusion now, doesn't it, based on what Rugby Australia have said? Go to a top 6 and first and second get a bye to the semi-final, and then they play the winners of the other 4 teams behind them. But yeah, it's too many. Again, you don't need that much.
I'd be in favour
teams left over.
I'd be in favour of that. Like the Highlanders were somehow in the playoffs, and anyone's had to say about the Highlanders all year is how rubbish they are, and they got into the playoffs. So that kind of tells a story. Super Rugby Americas. Super Rugby Americas. I should emphasize that sentence better. Semi-finals time. Peñarol, defending champions from Uruguay, are out. They lost 50 points to 27 to Pampas, whilst Dogos beat Paraguayan side Yacare 17 points to 14. So it was an all-Argentinian final. Going into the Northern Hemisphere, so PWR in the first semi-final, as we alluded to earlier, Bristol stunned Saracens 29 points to 21, having been 14 points to 5 down at half-time. So they will face in the final Gloucester Hartpury, who have been in frightening form this season and were double frightening in this game. They made 18 line breaks in the game as they beat Exeter 50 points to 19 at home. I watched this game, so I knew the Gloucester Hartpury were good. I didn't realise what an all-star team that they are. They are like a who's who of the good players from the Women's Six Nations. A lot of Welsh and Irish players in there as well, which is really cool. And there's a couple of Scots play for Bristol Bears as well. So I'm very much looking to the final. I'll be honest, I'll fess up, I hadn't really sat down and watched PWR properly this season. I watched the two semi-finals. I'm very impressed. And it was definitely, Gloucester Hartpury definitely would probably finish second in the Six Nations, to be honest. Like a really scarily good team. I would be very much interested to see Gloucester Hartpury versus an England team with no Gloucester Hartpury players in it. That would be a hell of a game that I would definitely watch. Elsewhere in women's rugby, in Elite 1, which is the French league, Bordeaux have won the title once again, second year in a row. They beat ASM 32 points to 17. And then in top 14, Le Barrages are locked in. Toulouse and Stade Francais, as you said, Ben, go straight to the semi-finals. Stade Francais snuck past Toulon in a very Everestune game. That was on the Sunday. Toulon now face La Rochelle. What a match that is. Definitely going to watch that. And Bordeaux host Racing. Racing have somehow been rubbish this season, yet are still in the playoffs. They just beat Castres and the aforementioned Nakarawa. Pro D2, we're delighted. Varna promoted. Can't wait to see them in the top 14 next season. We've been backing them all season. They beat Grenoble 69 in the final. If you want to learn more about Van, check out the rugby origin story that we've got about them on the channel. It's on our mini docs playlist. And then English Premiership. So it was the grand final in front of a sold out Twickenham. A very tense game. Statistically, not an incredible game. If you look at the stats, it was not a special game. And Courtney Laws said after the game that he was angry when it finished because he felt that Northampton really played below their best and let Bath back into it. But the stats lie because it was an incredibly tense game. Did you catch the red card incident?
I did, and it was a red card. I think Christoph Ridley, his communication with the TMO was absolutely fantastic and spot on. I think he wanted to make an early hit, dominate, his opposite number, and he just rode up too high. It's one of those where I think other referees might have opted for a yellow card, maybe, or it's a final, let's be careful, 115 on 15. But I think interpreting the laws as they were, I think there was no excuse. It wasn't, intent, but it's still a dangerous tackle, and you have to send someone off for that. I don't think there's any way of mitigating that down, and Christoph Ridley got that decision spot on.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. Christoph Ridley, I think the TMO was like, well, there's a dip from the carrier, and here's a super slow-mo angle from the far side and things. So I think Christoph Ridley deserves a huge amount of credit for how he stuck to his guns and was like, no, it's a red card, and he's going. And I think he was completely 100% right. Got to call out the Guardian for their crazy article that they put out after the game saying that the red card had ruined it. Don't know what they were watching. We need to get over this red cards ruin games things. And thankfully, the whole of the rugby Twitter community kind of piled on that Guardian post and was like, what are you on about, lads? Unfortunately, for Bath, that means that extends their trophyless run. They've actually won one trophy this century, which was the 2008 Challenge Cup. They haven't won a major tournament, if you don't count the Challenge Cup as a major tournament, which I think you probably should, to be fair. But they haven't won one of the big ones since 1998, when they won the Heineken Cup, as it was then. And Finn Russell has not won a trophy since 2015 Glasgow Pro 12 final. Is this becoming a thing? Why can't Finn Russell win any trophies?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. You would have thought when he went to Racing he might have won something, but he's lost a number of finals now. They lost to Exeter at Bristol during the 2020 COVID season, and I remember that game in particular. I think he threw an awful loop pass that was intercepted for, I can't remember who scored the try at the time, but again, with my Scotland hat very firmly on, he's, you know, probably he's a generational talent. You know, he'll be the Lions 10 next year, I would say, without really any significant competition. Although Clinton Smith at Northampton might get a shoe in if he has another good season. I think there's something there with him. I think, you know, there was an opportunity for Scotland to pick him up with, again, his Scottish kind of heritage, but I think England have got him now, and I think he's been playing very, very well this season, and it's good to see that, you know, that youth coming through in the 10 position, because I think there still is, you know, a struggle with number 10s. It's a difficult position first and foremost, but I think there's room there for talent to come through. So yeah, going back to Russell, he's world class. I think he will win. He has to win something. It won't be with Scotland at the Six Nations, because I don't think we're going to win the Six Nations for the foreseeable future. There isn't enough depth there. We just don't seem to be able to string 4 wins together. I don't think we won four games in the Six Nations since its inception. I think off the top of my head, I think it's only ever been 3. And the way the fixtures are, we always play Ireland and Wales away. We just don't win in Ireland. You know, we had a good opportunity this year, didn't really turn it on, and there's just not that consistency there for him. But I think with Bath being run the way they are under Joanne Van Graan, I think there's an opportunity for them to continue with that next season and, you know, go one stage better and win it.
They'll keep spending the money until they do. They've got a bit of money now, so
yeah.
Best of luck to them, I say. And then finally, MLR. Free Jacks held on to top spots in Eastern Conference after beating Old Glory, whilst the goddamn Houston Sabercats continued their dominance in the Western Conference to stay top of that. I won't do the Rugby TV guide with Ender not being here. Keep your eyes peeled to his Twitter account and to our Substack to get the Rugby TV guide emailed direct to your inbox every weekend on the Friday as part of the Friday Breakfast Show, which will be with you as normal. That brings us to an end. Thank you so much to everybody for listening, and thank you so much to Ben for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Hugh. All the best. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.